All right, everyone, we're going to get started on our homework review for the Chapter 13 problems. So some of the numbers that you may have had will be a little bit different in your homework. That's because the Connect does kind of random numbers. But these numbers that I'm going to use in this example are straight from the textbook. The concepts should apply regardless of numbers. So don't get hung up on the numbers if they don't look familiar to you. The point is to understand how to attack the problem. So we're going to do 1337 first, which is basically the intent of this problem is to drill in the formulas that we're going to use for ROI and residual income. So we have incomplete information. The problem asks us to fill in what is not evident. And the way we're going to attack this is to actually lay out all of those formulas that we went over in our last class, and we're going to figure out which ones will help us figure out what our unknown items are, and we're going to take the items that we do know, and we're going to do a little plug and play. So let's start with the first one, sales margin. So this one's real simple. If you go back to the formulas, we know that sales margin is equal to net income divided by sales revenue. So let's just go ahead and put that in there. So now we have sales margin of 20%. So the next thing asks us for capital turnover. We know our capital turnover is a simple calculation of sales revenue divided by investment capital, or invested capital. So let's do this, divided by that. So our capital turnover is 4. Return on investment, again, our return on investment formula is sales margin times capital turnover. So let's just take these two numbers that we calculated, and that gives us our ROI. And then lastly, we're going to calculate residual income. So remember, our residual income formula is residual income is equal to income minus the imputed interest rate times invested capital. So we know from the problem we have some given information, so we're just going to plug this in. I'm going to write a quick formula. And just like that, we have our answer. So the key to solving a problem like this is just basically knowing what formulas are available to you, understanding what's being asked of you, understanding what information is being given. So let's go through the next one now. All right, so for division 2, it gets a little bit trickier in that we're going to have to solve for some of these items algebraically. The first one was pretty much a simple and easy one. The second one is going to be a little bit trickier. So to begin, it asks for sales revenue. So how do you determine sales revenue given the information that you have? So they give you income and they give you margin. So let's use our sales margin formula, which is income divided by sales revenue. We know the 20% sales margin. We know the 1.6 for income. And we're just going to solve for x. And basically, what that gets us is $8 million. So again, despite my little flub there, all we're doing is solving this algebraically. So similar approach for the average investment. So the average investment is, I'm going to go ahead and tick mark these so we can track them. The average investment, we can get to it by using our capital turnover. So we know our capital turnover is 1. We know our sales revenue now is 8,000. So now that we have these two components, we can plug it into our capital turnover formula, and we can get our answer. All right, so now we have two of our variables solved for. Now let's think about what it'll take to get ROI. So we know the ROI formula is sales margin times capital turnover. So we know our sales margin, they gave us that. We know our capital turnover, they give us that. So that's a real easy one. And then lastly, residual income. Again, this is just straight out of our formula. Now that we have all the pieces, we can kind of back into it. So we're going to take 16. Let's go ahead and link that here. So we'll take our income minus our imputed interest rate, which is given. Oops, we want 0.8, that could have been bad, times 8. And that gets us to our 9,600 answer. All right, so the division 3 problem works in a little bit of the same way. So let's pause, take a moment, make sure you understand it, and then we'll come back to division 3 in a moment. All right, so we're going to do division 3, and as you might expect, the third one is even a little bit trickier. It's not immediately evident, or may not be, which one to kind of start with the information given. So rather than taking the first one, I actually chose to start with capital turnover, because I know I can get there because I know the ROI formula includes two items that are provided to me. So ROI, again, is sales margin times capital turnover. I'm given ROI, I'm given sales margin, so I could basically come up with my capital turnover by just solving it algebraically. All right, so next we're going to go to average investment. So how do we get to average investment with the information that we have? We're going to start here. We're going to look at ROI as our beginning formula, and we know that ROI is equal to income divided by invested capital. So now we got to figure out, okay, once we have that formula, what do we have? Well, we have income is equal to 20% of invested capital, or 20% times invested capital. We also know there's a second formula for residual income, which is income minus imputed interest times invested capital. And we know that value for residual income is 4,800. So what we're going to do is lay out the residual income formula, and then we're going to plug in this 20% times invested capital as our income. And we're just going to solve algebraically. So this is what I call the plug-in play. In this case, there's kind of a formula within a formula that makes it a little bit tricky. But at the end of the day, if you, let's clean this up a little bit. If you take your time and understand which formulas can help get me to the right answer or get me to the information I need, sometimes you find a case like this where it's one formula built within another. So that one is a little bit tricky. So give it a second, pause the video, make sure you understand it, work through it a second time if you need to, and we'll discuss as necessary. All right, so the next step is we're going to go after income, and this one's a little bit easier. We know that income is a part of the ROI equation, so let's use the ROI equation. We know that ROI is equal to income divided by invested capital. We know what invested capital is now. We know what ROI is now. So let's just solve this algebraically. And there we have it. Income is equal to 800,000. All right, so just pause, make sure you get that, and then we'll go on to the last piece. All right, so the last piece we have to solve is sales revenue. And again, this one gets a little bit easier as you fill in more pieces of the puzzle. But the easiest way to find sales revenue is to use the sales margin formula, which again, sales margin is income divided by sales revenue. We know the sales margin, we know the income. So we can solve this algebraically, and we get to sales revenue of $3.2 million. So to summarize this series of exercises, the first thing you have to do is to understand what the problem is asking for. The second is to understand what formulas are at your disposal. So remember, on the test and in life, you're going to have reference material where these formulas will be scribbled down. So they are kind of the tools in your toolkit for solving this problem. Once you know which formulas to employ in solving a problem, it just becomes a matter of plug and play and solving for the missing piece algebraically. So hopefully this demo helps. If there's any questions, we'll regroup and discuss as a class.